willing to join us here for this first Filmmaking for Change webinar. I'm John Fitzgerald, for those of you who don't already know me. And I thought I'd just take a couple minutes to give you a little bit of my background so you kind of have an understanding for why I'm giving you this Filmmaking for Change webinar today. I was born and raised in the South Bay in Los Angeles. And sadly, I went through a pretty interesting personal crisis. And in therapy, the therapist said, that would make a great movie. Maybe you should take a screenwriting class. So I actually did. I picked up a book, and lo and behold, the structure for writing a movie fell right into my lap. And I was undeclared, went back to school that year at UC Santa Barbara, and took an intro film class and loved it. I felt like this was a combination of all of the arts. It's an amazing opportunity to do something interesting and expose new ideas to the world. So I declared film as my major. I graduated, went into a training program at one of the major agencies, always working on my script that I started. And then I was ready to really raise some funds. And in between the fundraising that took me 3 or 4 years, I was working on some movies. I worked as a production assistant on a number of films, some really bad ones, but I did work on My Cousin Vinny, which was kind of fun. But I did that for a long time until I was ready to get the movie made. I raised $125,000, fortunately, and made this movie. Was hoping it would play Sundance just like everybody else that makes an independent film. And unfortunately, it didn't get in. So me and a couple other guys started the Slamdance Film Festival. So kind of by accident, I became a festival director, and then ended up doing that for the American Film Institute and Abu Dhabi and Santa Barbara and many others. So I fell into the role of festival director. But what's interesting about this journey is it taught me a lot about social impact films. I started paying a lot of attention to these movies and recognized that they could really come out and make a difference in the world. They could engage audiences and inspire people to want to create change. So I started paying more and more attention, especially to the documentary films, and eventually got the itch to go back into filmmaking myself. And I made a film called The Back Nine about trying to chase a dream later in life, after turning 40, for example. And that really kind of triggered it all. I ended up making a few more films after that. We're going to talk a little bit about as case studies and examples today. But what I realized was that there was some new buzz factor and an evolution of documentary. Some would say we entered a golden age of documentary where more broad audiences were embracing this idea of social impact films. And I was able to take some of these ideas from Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey and funnel them into more of a documentary structure. And the Hero's Journey is something we're going to talk a lot about today. And I decided, why not write a book about it? Why not take some of these other books that we're going to talk about in a minute and filter it down into documentary and what I call the cause cinema genre, which I believe is going to become a very popular subgenre of this space. So I've been doing festivals for a long time. I've made a few independent films, and now I'm back in the South Bay where I'm going to emphasize social impact movies with the Cinema Society there and running a South Bay Film Festival. So it all comes full circle, and I'm really excited to bring all these ideas to you, because ultimately it's all about you. You're the change makers, and as you're going to see, there are a lot of change makers out there who weren't filmmakers but decided that they wanted to use film as a medium to help change the world. But before we jump into the actual webinar itself, I want to introduce you to Craig Vetter. He's my partner on a project, and he's co-organizing this with me. Craig, you want to say a couple words here, and then we'll jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, everybody. My name's Craig Vetter. I'm a classic example of what John had mentioned. Been an engineer for about 25 years, left that a little over a year and a half ago, and I'm partnering with John to make a film. A friend of mine has a fantastic book with an environmental theme, a great social cause. And so I've gone from being an engineer to a filmmaker. So it's the exact thing that John is speaking of, and I'm happy to be with you today. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. So a few more housekeeping ideas here. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background on this, the structure of this. We're going to cover 4 main categories today. 3 of them are in the book: development, which is kind of where you come up with the story and do all the prep, and production, distribution, and then activation. So we're going to cover each of those, and we'll have a few minutes for questions and answers in between, but I'm going to try and race through this as more of an overview. So a lot more information in the book, and our website's going to have more resources, but I want to just give everybody, excuse me, an overview, and then we'll take questions at the end for 15 or 20 minutes or however long you need to go. So the good news is there are a lot of social impact films being made now. We're definitely seeing more than ever before. And I think that there are more folks out there that didn't necessarily think of themselves as filmmakers who are finally recognizing, you know what, I can make a movie. I just need to bring the team together. And I think that that's what we're going to really try and show with you today. There's a number of films: Inconvenient Truth, Citizen 4, The Cove. These are all hugely successful movies, Oscar-nominated films, winning films. They're all social impact movies. Some of these movies have been done with more of a thriller component. You think about The Cove. That movie felt like a thriller to me. But, you know, what's amazing is that they had more of a narrative structure to them, that no more just talking heads documentary. And I think that's what's really intriguing to me. And I'm just thrilled that I was able to fall into this idea of using film for change, because I can do something I love to do, but I feel like it can make a difference. So I'm hoping that we can help you all make a difference with some of your films. All right, so here's an example of what I started with, the idea of change makers. So these are 3 filmmakers that started out with concepts. Forks Over Knives, this gentleman was a real estate broker, and he decided, after reading the China study and being really concerned with diet, that he wanted to make a movie and use that as a vehicle to get people to change their diets. And he made Forks Over Knives, and it's hugely successful. One of the attachments there in the handouts is about the screening toolkit you can use for that. The Milky Way, this was a film made by 2 lactation consultants. We'll talk more about this later. I actually directed this one, but the moral of the story here is that these are people that decided they wanted to take something they learned in their field, in this case breastfeeding and what's wrong with breastfeeding in America, and use film as a vehicle to get the message out. Warrior One, Jill Wheeler is an amazing WellFit coach. She's an adventure therapist. She wears a lot of hats, but she knew that she could take this idea of taking girls on a challenge and using adventure therapy and inspire other girls to be leaders. So these 3 examples of non-filmmakers who became filmmakers. And I hope that will resonate with you all, because you can all be change makers and you can all be filmmakers. And my goal with this today is to kind of make this fun and take you as the hero through what I'll call the 12 stages of the journey, and the journey through making a movie, because it is a journey. And in the first case, development is where it all begins, and that's one of our categories today. And in film terms, in terms of the mythical story from Joseph Campbell and his author buddies, it's the call to adventure. You start in the ordinary world, and then somebody gives you an idea, and you get this call, and you've got to decide if you want to take the call. Then you go to production. That's crossing the threshold. Okay, you've now flipped the switch. Distribution, that's the ordeal. Activation is the road back. We're going to talk more about that later. So let's jump right in here to development. The call to adventure. The call to adventure sets the story rolling by disrupting the comfort of the hero's ordinary world, presenting a challenge or a quest that must be undertaken. Here's the hero's journey that I was talking about, and this is what was introduced by one of the authors that you're going to hear more about later. And he took this concept and made it his own, but it's based on Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces. And ultimately, you see that the arrow moves kind of to the left, and it walks you through these 12 stages of the journey. Here's where they started. Hero of a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell, 1949. He's probably one of the greatest philosophers and greatest mythologists of all time. And Christopher Vogler wrote The Writer's Journey. Now, this guy is the one who made a memo famous in the mid-'80s when he realized that he could plug Star Wars into this framework. And if you break it down, you can really see that the structure really applies. And there's video interviews with Lucas talking about the influence of Joseph Campbell. So this guy Vogler wrote this amazing memo that was circulated all throughout Hollywood, and it became famous. And he wrote this book. It's a bestseller. Myth in the Movies breaks them all down, and Filmmaking for Change is me just taking some of these ideas and applying them to social impact. But these films, Star Wars, not a social impact movie, but it's the biggest, so I figured I'd stick it on here. So Western, Dances with Wolves. War, All Quiet on the Western Front. Drama, Boys in the Hood. So all those movies either were nominated or won Best Picture. Okay, so The Milky Way, not going to get a nomination, but it's a documentary, so we're going to talk about it. So let's take a break here from the webinar itself and actually see if you can play the trailer, the MP4 that's there, and we'll come back in 2.5 minutes and continue our conversation.
We see lots of images of sexualized breasts, but the image of a lactating breast is somehow unusual.
Breastfeeding a baby is an intimate act.
And it should be done privately, like farting or masturbating or pissing.
Yet another breastfeeding controversy.
It's creepy.
We are in a society that spends a lot of time doing the opposite of empowering women.
Being a lactation consultant so many years, I began to see that there really is a problem in America.
It felt like I failed.
The entire structure of pediatric care in America has been influenced by formula company money. There's no profit to be had in supporting breastfeeding, period.
The formula companies have created a huge insecurity for moms that make them feel like they can't feed their own babies.
Let's not mention the fact that it might destroy your kid's immune system, because there's another for-profit industry later that can benefit from that.
I think women are surrounded by a lot more people who are ready to help them fail than to help them succeed.
We need some answers, and we need to turn this around.
How do we build a society which nurtures breastfeeding as part of a larger concept of attachment?
We're trying to come at solving the world's problems from the symptomatic stuff back. I think it would be so much easier to start from the beginning and work up.
This is a huge movement that needs to happen right now in America.
Women can trust themselves. They can trust their body, and they can trust their babies.
All right, so that was the Milky Way. So clearly, you haven't seen the whole movie, but when you hopefully get a chance to see it, you'll see that Jennifer is the hero. She's the one with the idea, and she goes on this journey, and she decides that she wants to actually find the answers. Why is America less than 15% as a success rate in breastfeeding in America? So we go to Europe, we go to Scandinavia, where they have a 90% success rate. So we meet all these experts and we go on this journey together, and we come back, and then there's a conclusion, and they're creating a whole foundation and a movement around this idea of how important breastfeeding is. And people just think it's nutrition, and it's really not. That's about 10% of it. So just a good thing to see, to put this in perspective in terms of structure. So where do you begin? You got to start with your idea. So some of you might have an idea already, but other great resources, obviously books, newspapers, magazines, the internet, there are ideas everywhere. I pulled out of the section 1 of the LA Times a few weeks ago just to do an exercise, and I found 10, 11 stories that could have been interesting social impact movies right in that first section. So they're out there. Some people are more interested in a category specific: education, environment, human rights, animal rights, health. Is there one of these categories that really speaks to you? And if not, there are plenty of other categories. These are just examples, but that's another place to start. And then doing the research and finding out what's already been done. You all know the internet is an amazing tool, and you can find out how many movies. A few years ago, there were, I think, 3 movies about bullying came out in the same year. So here are some big questions to ask yourself, though. What are the goals of the project? What are your personal goals? Are you trying to make a lot of money with this movie? Are you trying to create change? Are you trying to do both? Is there a specific audience for it? Is there a marketplace for this movie? Is it a targeted audience that has a lot of partners in that space that can help you with outreach? Or is it something really niche and really specific? What kind of time commitment do you have? Hoop Dreams took over 10 years to make. We spent 3 years on the back nine, about 2 on the Milky Way, well, no, a little less than 2 on the Milky Way. And Warrior One was done in a year. On the highest pass, we knew that we were going to shoot for 21 days. It was about this trip to India. So we knew there was prep. We knew we were going to shoot it over a concentrated period. Then we came back. But you have to think about your time, how much time you have. And you have to come up with an overall strategy for the production. And of course, you're going to hear this a lot. Social media, critical. We didn't have this as a tool. Studios still average over $30 million in marketing each film. It's insane. And you can do so much more with social media. And if you do come up with an idea, before you even roll cameras, you should get that URL, register.com. It's cheap. In finances, who's going to pay for this? Are you going to use credit cards? Family? You're going to do a private placement memorandum and have investors sell shares, grants and foundations? Great opportunity for social impact movies. But the truth is, it can take up to 6 months to even hear back from these people. Crowdfunding, everyone knows about Kickstarter and Indiegogo, but you have to have a deep database to make sure that you're going to get everything you can out of it. A lot of filmmakers just default to these places thinking, oh, I've got a few hundred friends or got some Twitter followers. It doesn't work. You have to have thousands to really generate substantial funding. Product placement, a lot of product placement in movies these days. Super Size Me, Morgan Spurlock did one, got Palm in the title of his movie. They gave him a lot of money for that. So think about sponsorship as well. Think about product placement and sponsorship, and think about new models. It's kind of the wild, wild west out there right now. Anything goes. We did an interesting thing with the Milky Way where I'd done a mosaic for one of my other projects just as a promotional tool, as an image. And we were thinking with the mosaic project, wouldn't it be cool? Because one of the ideas is people need to see women breastfeeding more. There needs to be more sculptures, more art. People need to see it so that it becomes more normalized here. That's part of our problem. And so we thought if we use these mosaics of these classic breastfeeding photos, and people submitted photos of child nursing on mothers, we could make mosaics out of those images, and everybody paid $20 to be part of this mosaic, and you could zoom in on the picture and find yourself. So these mosaics are made with hundreds of little tiny images of mothers nursing. So it's a pretty cool little project, just, as an example. So we've now moved past development. We're about to cross the threshold. This is really where you commit to the journey. This is really where, it's the end of the first act if you're writing a narrative. And this is where it really gets interesting. So keep in mind that we're talking about documentary and narrative here, but some of these different categories shift depending on which of those you're doing. So for example, in a documentary, you might need an outline or a treatment or interview questions for a specific expert. Whereas if you're doing a narrative, you need a script. And it's scheduled completely different if you're doing a narrative script, because you're going to shoot it in a concentrated period of time. You've got 30 to 50, 100 people on a big movie all working, so they cram it into the shortest amount of time they can. Scheduling a documentary could be different. Are you tracking somebody that's aging? Are you traveling all over the world to track somebody doing a journey? Are you just comparing different countries? Highest pass, we were in India, and we knew that we were going to be there a certain number of days. With the back nine, it was like, is there a golf tournament? It just depends. But scheduling's key, because that's really how you budget everything. That's what's going to dictate the cost. And of course, your crew. Got to crew up, and if you're making a documentary in particular that could span a lot longer than a few weeks of production, you really want to make sure that you hire somebody that's more than just good, that's more than just experience with their gear and their cameras, if you will. You want somebody that you can hang out with, because you're going to spend a lot of time with these people. So be really careful who you hire. It's more than just the quality of work. And what's the timeline? How long is it going to take from when you start rolling cameras for this film to hit theaters or to hit the internet? You got to think about that, because that might influence your budget and your own personal schedule and your family schedule. Back to social media. Think about social media in pre-production. Think about building a community for your movie as you're developing. Don't wait if you don't have to. If you've got a cause-based movie, if it's the environment, there's tons of environment partners. There's tons of people and tons of organizations that would love to keep track of what you're doing. And those are all people that could come and buy your movie later. So build that community as early as you can. And again, finances kind of comes down to that. How are you going to pay for it? So you're creating the world. Story considerations: who are the characters? What's their arc? Who's the hero? Who's the mentor? Who are the antagonists? In the Milky Way, we didn't really have an antagonist. The antagonist in the Milky Way was the formula companies. It's not really a person, but it's important to think about, is there a bad guy or a bad organization, or who's the hero, who are the mentors, who's going to help this hero along, and what's the arc, so that you do see that there is some sort of transformation for this character by the end of the movie. And hopefully, if you're doing a cause-based movie, the audience is going along the ride with you and they're changed. Interview and voiceovers. So think about the interviews. How do you want to structure these creatively? Some movies, they don't want to see the interviewer. Some movies, they don't even want to see the interviewee on camera. They want to try and do creative montages and archival footage and have somebody's voice playing over it. There's a lot of different examples of both. And you look at, March of the Penguins, that was a foreign film, and then Morgan Freeman came in and did voiceover for it. So are you going to have a celebrity voiceover? Is it going to be the hero? Voiceover is a great tool, especially for documentary. And dialogue, if you're doing a narrative, the single most difficult thing, I think, in writing great dialogue is being able to listen to how people talk. And it's easy to structure something. It's harder to write the way people talk. So make sure people read it over. And what about your themes? What are the themes of your film? And motifs. Motifs are like, we were in Peru doing this movie, Warrior One, and the sun is a major player in Peru. It's like the god. And so we thought, well, let's get a lot of footage of the sun. Let's get flares. Let's make this an interesting motif that weaves throughout the film. So just another way to try and be creative. Visual style, the look and feel. So the color palette, already talked a little bit about that. Just thinking about what it's going to look like. And are you going to storyboard it? Hitchcock storyboarded every shot. A lot of filmmakers don't use it. It just depends on what your comfort level is. I like to think of the composition as I'm trying to think about how the movie's going to be pieced together, but it's totally up to you. Interior versus exterior. It's really important to try and mix it up. You don't want people stuck inside for too long. You want to kind of have a balance, so there's an ebb and a flow. Interview composition, you're going to put the person front and center, or you're going to move them to one side or the other. We did some fun stuff with The Highest Pass and a little bit with Warrior One, where we actually had the character on one side of the frame or the other, and then we could dissolve in and out. So it just kind of made for an interesting flow. Fluid and static camera. Do you like to move the camera? I think audiences like to see the camera moving personally. Some people like to put the camera on sticks and just shoot away. Flow and pacing. Again, think of movies like Citizen 4, The Cove. These movies had intense pacing. They were like thrillers. Think about what is the pacing for your story. What tone do you want to set for your movie? And don't over or underestimate the power of music and sound. That seems like a given, but it sometimes isn't thought about until you get into post, and you don't need to wait that long. Production team, we talked a little bit about this. Just make sure that they're people that you can get along with and that you want to hang out with. Some of you may be a director. You may need to hire a director. director of photography, the person that actually shoots the film, manages the cameras. Sound, really important, taken for granted an awful lot in independent films. If you can't hear what people are saying or it's staticky, you can't use it, and you're not going to go back to this country and redo it. So be really careful to get good sound. Coordinator, research. For documentaries in particular, when I did the back nine, I had to research the history of golf. It took forever. It was fun, but it took a long time. So make sure you've allocated enough time to do the research. Composer, again, tying back to music, most of these movies have a composer, and there are a ton of them out there. And if you're lucky, you can get a few source songs, a few needle drops that are just little pieces of songs throughout the movie, and then you have a composer fill the gaps. Some movies have composed score start to finish, but it really depends on the movie. And editor, they say that movies are made in the editing room, and it couldn't be more true for documentary, because you could end up with 200 hours of footage, and the editor is going to one that's going to help you find the story. So think about budgeting. Ultimately, you have to pay for this, right? Starts with the schedule, because everything's dictated by the schedule. If you're shooting for a certain amount of days in a foreign country, how much is that going to cost you to get there? How much is it going to cost you to rent the gear? Are you bringing the gear? Are you renting the gear? Are you shooting for 3 weeks in a row? Or are you shooting off and on for 3 years? That's an expense you got to really think about. And cast, if you're doing an independent film and it's a narrative, you might be able to get SAG actors to do it for scale if it's an important cause-related movie. Happens all the time now. Actors like to do interesting movies that have something to say. They'll do their big studio movie to get their salary quote, and then they'll come and do an independent film, as long as it's a good script. And experts, sometimes you give them a donation or a contribution to whatever cause they support, just as a gesture, but more often than not, you don't have to pay them. Travel and accommodations, again, think about the fact if you're bringing a crew on location, you got to pay to put them up. Music, we kind of already covered, but don't underestimate how much that could cost you. We were fortunate that we had some people do us some favors, a few $100s a song, but don't go put a Rolling Stones or Beatles song in your movie and think you're just going to be able to use it. Be really careful about the music. Food, always taken for granted by new coming filmmakers, because they just assume that you're just going to keep shooting, and there's actually a routine. You're supposed to feed these guys every 6 hours, and they're working hard. There's a lot of prep, and you're shooting, then you snack, and then you're shooting again. 12-hour days is the average, sometimes 14 to 15. Where are you going to do the post? You're going to do it in your garage? You're going to do it in your house? You have enough money to set up an office? Are you going to let the editor do it at their house? These are things to think about as you're budgeting and planning your movie. Deliverables is another oversight. If you don't need a print, maybe it's digital cinema projection these days, but it still could cost you $1,500 to $2,500 to play in a theater. If you're not going to play in a theater, you just might need an HD cam that you can send out to the different broadcast networks. In some cases these days, it's just a digital file, but it's important to think about that, and doing the copyright search and the dialogue script if they want to take it foreign. So don't overlook deliverables. Marketing, kind of obvious. You want to get the word out, so be thinking about how much you want to spend on marketing. Always one of the things that gets cut first, because it's not like a hotel where you've got to pay the cost. So marketing kind of always gets pared back. And there's social media again. What are you going to spend on social media? You going to do it yourself, or are you going to hire somebody? So now we're in post. Got the movie in the can, but now we got to make the story. Sometimes the story changes. The Highest Pass, we had a hero, we had a mentor, we had an ensemble group of characters, but we had to reshape the structure of the story somewhat in post, and that's part of the fun, but you gotta be thinking about it. The editorial staff, we already talked about. Storage, you got to be able to have lacy drives and G drives. You need these drives. You need to back everything up 2 or 3 times in case something dies. Workflow, what's the workflow going to be? Are you going to have them send you cuts every day, every week, how often are you going to be in the editing room versus just looking at cuts? Music and effects, a lot of the effects can be done in Final Cut. Sometimes you need to go to a lab and have some extras done. We already covered the deliverables. Survey screenings are really important. Survey screenings are really where you can test how things are working out. You're so close to it when you're making it that it really helps to bring in some family, some friends, and some people you don't know, and fill out a list of questions. Is it too long? How's the pacing? What do you think of this character? What do you think of this scene? You can get specific comments, and it's not just an independent thing. The studios do this too. We're going to talk about festivals in a few minutes, but festivals and premieres are really important. It's important to think about them early enough in the game, because you might be sending rough cuts to not miss deadlines for festivals, even if the film's 2 or 3 months from being done. So you need to think about all those dates and all those deadlines ahead of time. And there's social media again. And hopefully you've got the URL for the website, but you're developing the website. And if you haven't already launched it, in post it's getting close to the time to launch it. And the action campaign. Have you prepared an action campaign? Okay, jumping back in. Okay, so distribution, this is really where the rubber hits the road, because you already got the movie in the can, but I can't tell you how many movies are made that are never seen. And frankly, it's because there's way too many average movies getting made these days, because it's inexpensive now, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do Filmmaking for Change, because I want people to have the right tools so that they can make a movie that more than their family and friends really want to see. So when you think about distribution, you have to really think about, how am I going to get this movie out? This is really the toughest stage of the journey. This is really where you're going to find out if this movie has what it takes to find an audience. And in some cases, it may secure a big distributor, and it's an open and shut case. But with over 5,000 films getting made every year independently, there just aren't that many that are going to find distribution in a traditional way. So here's some key questions for your release strategy. What are the top line goals? Are you trying to reach a broad audience? Are you trying to reach a targeted audience? Are you trying to speak to, when you do Waiting for Superman, are you trying to speak to the education space? Are you trying to speak to all parents that have kids that are going to go through the education process? Something like An Inconvenient Truth, I mean, we all care about the environment, but there may be a more targeted demo when you're talking about health. Some people don't want to think too much about the food they eat. They want to enjoy their food. So Forks Over Knives isn't necessarily for everybody. So think about your top line goals, and then think about who's going to manage it. Are you going to manage it? Are you going to manage this start to finish? Or are you going to hire somebody to help you? They have what's called producers reps that can help in various stages, specifically for distribution. And they can really help, because at the end of the day, you finish your movie, you can't just call Netflix and say, do you want to buy my movie? There are certain vendors that you have to go through a producer's rep or a distributor to get to. And most importantly, think about the platforms. Like I said earlier, it's like the wild, wild west out there. I think there are so many opportunities now that we're going to come to in a few minutes to create a hybrid model where you're not doing the traditional find a theatrical, find DVD, find some cable, and then play some ancillary markets. It's who are the right partners for my project, and what's the right release schedule for it. And it may not make sense to release it in theaters. There's plenty of movies that reach a huge audience that you all may not have even heard about, but that managed to reach the audience they needed to reach to really create change in that space. So it's important to really think about your platforms. What we've done in the past is create what we call a marketing and distribution blueprint. And this really breaks down all of these categories in a very specific way after seeing your film, or at least hearing more about your film and maybe seeing some rough footage, because a lot of this takes time to plan out. You don't want to wait until the movie's done to then start thinking about what your strategy is going to be. So I'm just going to rifle through this, and then I'll send it to you later as a resource. But ultimately, again, what are the goals? Is it about the money? Is it about the audience or the cause? I worked with a filmmaker before who said to me point blank, this is a great social impact film, but the truth is I'm not an activist. I want to go make my next movie. So he wanted to make that movie that really had a huge mission and then hand it off to somebody else to really chase the cause. The release strategy, we just talked about that a bit. Key art's important. What's your poster going to look like? What about a press kit? You can do searches for press kits. They're pretty standard. But what's the look and feel of your movie? If you think about all the movies that resonate with you, most of them will have some type of key art and press kit that kind of brings it all together in a certain look. Think about your trailer. YouTube, Vimeo. These are great resources to really get the word out about your project. And you may have to hire somebody to make your trailer. Not all typical editors can do trailers. It's an art form, and there's companies that are making millions of dollars that are focused entirely on making trailers because it's hard. It's hard to do. Back to the website. Think about what you want your website to be as you're building your community, and know that you have to have the type of site that can evolve and grow. You're not going to see film until you're ready to see the film. But once the film's ready to go, you got to add these extra buttons and use social media. We've already talked about social media a bit, but you got to make sure you get the Twitter, the blog, the URL, get all of those things in line as you're building everything out instead of waiting till the very, very end. And think about your partners. What partners can do outreach for you? What groups on Facebook can do outreach for you, or LinkedIn for that matter? Press releases, again, anybody can find models of press releases. There's a lot of free newswire services out there now, and you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people that just put stories out there and they get picked up. So, get the word out. We already covered partners, already covered budget, timeline. Think about your timeline. Think about, are you going to play festivals? How long do you want to play festivals? We had a film that was at Slamdance. The guy played 180 film festivals. That's a lot, but he wanted to travel the world. He didn't have a family, and he basically used his movie to travel the world on somebody else's dime. And then there are some people that have families and have kids, and they can't be gone that much, but they can go maybe once a month to a festival. So what do you want to get out of that festival play? And then when's your public release going to be? And are you going to go the educational route? And if it's a social impact film, we sure hope you do. So festival strategy, just briefly here. Again, we do festival packages, but ultimately it's important to think about what your submission strategy is going to be, because festivals charge admission fees. You could spend several $1,000s just on application fees alone. So you got to decide, which festivals do I want to play? Do I want to only play narrative if I have a narrative? If I'm a doc, do I want to play some narrative? Sundance plays docs. There's a lot of doc-heavy festivals. Again, we'll send you a list, but there's probably 3,500 plus film festivals now. Some of them aren't worth your time. Nobody's going to come. Nobody's going to care. But there are some great festivals that will give you some credibility, or community festivals that will generate awareness for your film. You might even get a review in a local paper, maybe get some radio time. So it's important to think about which festivals could make sense for you. Is it destination festivals like the Bahamas? Is it Seattle or Palm Springs, great community festivals? Or is it industry like Sundance and Toronto? When you get into the festival, make sure you get the word out, do press releases, get your materials out. Who are your champions going to be in each of those regions? And be really nice to the staff, because they'll speak highly of you and they'll introduce you to all the right people. And you never know who you're going to meet. Could be somebody to make the next project with. Or it could be another festival director asking what standout films they could recommend and which filmmakers are cool. Think about the outreach once again. How can you maximize your outreach at that region? Can you get postcards out? Can you do postering at the schools? And then the screening. Who's going to be there for the Q&A? Who's going to get emails? How can you follow up? How can you maximize that attendance and get pictures of everything? All right, so let's talk about theaters for a moment. This has been the holy grail for filmmakers forever. And I think at the end of the day, it's just not the same anymore. I mean, a lot of documentaries are more than ever before, certainly, are finding the silver screen, but they're not making any money there. It's really kind of a sad state in theaters, and they don't make enough to really make it worth the while. You can four-wall it, which means you buy that theater for a week. If you think it's an Academy qualifier, then you have to play it in LA and New York for a week, and if you do, then it can qualify, and you can rent the theater. Or you could do a service deal, and you could pay a broker to try and find you theaters where they'll play your film and they'll do a box office split, but then you got to pay the guy to do the deal. Event release is an interesting model these days. There's a company called Fathom that's doing it, that is a joint venture with a number of the theater chains, which is great because then they can promote your movie to all their loyal customers. But this is where you take a movie and you play it on 20, 50, 100 screens all at once. So if you want to see this movie about ballet or whatever the case may be, you can promote to that audience and say, let's go and see it on Saturday, June 21st at whatever time it's playing in that theater. So you kind of can gear all your marketing to one day, and it's not sitting in a theater 7 days that week and playing 3 times a day to almost empty crowds. So that makes a lot of sense. But I think the best thing happening right now in theaters for these kinds of movies is theatrical on demand. Tug is probably the leader. There's another company called Gather, but Tug is a partner of ours. We think they're great guys, really smart, and they really care about the films and the filmmakers. And ultimately what this is having a film in their database. It's got all the bells and whistles and the trailer and the key art and all of that. And it's got a list of the theaters. So you can say, I want to play LA, I want to play New York, I want to play Dallas, I want to play these regions, and find a champion in each region. They go in to the Tug page for your film and they request a screening. Then Tug goes out and books that screening for you, and you start promoting it, and your champion starts promoting in that region. And if it gets enough ticket sales to essentially tip the screening for a green light, let's say you say as the filmmaker, I want to make $200 on this screening. I need to sell X number of tickets. So I get my cut, Tug gets the cut, the theater gets the cut. If it sells X number of tickets, then it's a go. Or you can just throw the threshold out. We played in over 50 markets on Mother's Day with the Milky Way, and it's played in another 50 theaters since then. So that can really, really help. And it generates a lot of word of mouth for the movie. And if it does well, then it can drive other markets. So here's a snapshot. Again, I'm going to send you this, so don't feel like you got to memorize this crazy stats. But over $17 billion spent in the home video market in 2014. You can see on the right there, the disc sales is way down, and it's going to continue to go down every year. But see what's up over here on the left is the digital sales and the iTunes. And then you got the subscriptions, which is Netflix. So people are seeing movies now in different ways. But there's a lot of chances to do it. And there's a lot of platforms in that digital space. You just got to decide which space you really want to play in first. Cable is interesting too. There's a lot of cable channels. You've got HBO, you've got PBS, you've got Showtime, you've got all these other channels. But again, a producer's rep's going to probably have to be the one to take it into those companies for you. And then you have companies like DirecTV, was just bought by AT&T. I want to say $49 billion or something crazy. So you're going to see bundling with phones and seeing movies on digital devices, and it's an interesting time in the digital space when you start connecting cable and phone. For international, there's 3 major markets. And you get a sales agent, you can find them all on the American Film Market website, find ones that have the types of films that you're releasing. These guys take the films of these markets. There's the European Film Market in Berlin in February, Marché du Film in Cannes in May, AFM is in Los Angeles in the fall, I believe November. So these are the major markets to sell off the international territories. But I think educational is the most interesting space, especially for a social impact film. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in activation. But education is interesting. Invisible Children, I don't know if you all saw the Coney campaign, but this was seen by millions of people in such a short time. This was a movie about chasing Coney, who was, creating child soldiers. It's just atrocious what this guy was doing. And the whole campaign was to chase Coney out. And these guys took this film into grade schools, basically, and created these action kits with bracelets and posters and charms. And they raised tons of money, millions of dollars per quarter, showing this short film in this case, and talking about the issues and getting these kids engaged at trying to help so that there's kids on the other side of the world who aren't having to carry guns around. Really intense program, but education has become a big market, and you see schools now looking to bring movies in. I don't know about you, but I remember seeing films when I was in school. These teachers want educational social impact films, and if you can bring them a toolkit and a curriculum, all the better. You have companies like EdTwist that is really bringing a lot of amazing communities together on very specific subjects, and it's almost like connecting, Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and all these social media tools all into one community, but you can share videos and you can share photos and you can talk and you can have conversations. It's a lot more robust than some of those other social media outlets, and I think we're going to hear a lot more from them. I think they're going to relaunch in a major way sometime in the fall. Tug we've already talked about, but Tug and I are going to do a screening series, a cinema society basically in colleges, where we take these films into schools with a curriculum probably developed by Journeys in Film. They're the leaders. They're at USC. They create curriculum for movies. And then take toolkits like this one here, the Leadership and Empowerment Toolkit that we did for Warrior One. This is what we did with WellFit. Jill Wheeler, she really designed this whole thing. We just helped her put it together and give it some scope. But this is a 30-plus slide document that now can be shared about empowerment and leadership for kids. I think it's really, really important. Which leads us right into activation. And I'm not going to talk a lot about activation because we're going to send you all an activation kit that's going to break it all down, a lot more specific. But I don't want to take up that much more time so we can jump into some questions. But ultimately, if you're a social impact filmmaker, you really want to make a movie that can activate and get people to take action. So let's raise the stakes and let's make sure that you're doing this for a higher cause if you can. So think about the film and the cause. We talked a little bit about it before, the audience versus the social change and your goals. What are your strategies? Do you want people to sign a petition? Do you want them just to make a donation? Or do you want them to get involved in the cause itself? Partnerships. Partnerships are key. There's a lot of huge companies out there, NGOs, and you look at Charity Navigator, hundreds and thousands of charities and causes, and you can search by category. These are all potential partners for a specific cause-related film, and they're all looking for content, by the way. So if you've got film, you can give them clips to really help enhance their websites. Showing and sharing, I think, as we said before with education, showing these movies, doing house screenings, doing house parties, some of the things that I put in there, the Forks Over Knives screening kit, great opportunity to bring people together to see a movie and talk about the issues. So how are you going to circulate? Are you going to have viewing parties? You can have toolkits. And one of the hot topics these days is how you're going to measure the change. How do you know if your film made a difference? And the Knight Foundation and Gates gave $3.5 million to the Lear Center to research that very subject. So they're going to work with companies like Participant and really try and dig deep to find out what is it that we can measure. We know film and entertainment, TV, media, it's the single biggest, greatest tool for mass communication. What we don't necessarily know yet is how you quantify the change. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. All right, so in summary, you guys all still with me? Do you have clear goals for the film? And what about for the cause? Does it have these key storytelling points that we're talking about in the stages of the journey? I think if you can find a movie that fits into that template, or at least close, there's a great chance that you're going to have an entertainment value that's going to really intrigue and inspire audiences. Is there a target audience? Are there obvious partners? And what's the timeline? Are you a change maker? I think you are. You wouldn't be listening to this. So here's my website, filmmakingforchange.com. You probably already knew that. We're going to send you an activation kit. And we also develop different kits and packages around development, production, distribution, activation. So if you have a project, we'd love to hear from you and see how we can help. Terrific. Well, thank you all for going on this journey with us today. And I look forward to your feedback. And hopefully our paths will cross again. Best to all. Thank you.